Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Helea, aka No Justice MTG, and it's Thursday, so it's ladies' night, and I'm joined by Dalia Gebrial. Dalia, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. I'm still celebrating with my little Zoran mug that one of my friends who lives in Mamdanistan, formerly known as New York City, he lives there, so he brought it back for me when he last came the few months ago, actually. So yeah, still on a high, although kind of a few depressing stories today, but we'll get through it.
True. If anything is a little bit too depressing tonight, at the very least, we can still be celebrating the total victory of transgender Islamo-communist dark woke. Coming up tonight, I will speak to the wife of British journalist Sami Hamdi, who is still detained by ICE, how Elbit Systems planted a fake story about domestic direct action group Palestine Action, and right-wingers are freaking out over John Lewis's Christmas advert that's only the first week of November. Before we start tonight, it's Thursday, which means one thing. Tomorrow morning, Ash's weekly newsletter, The Cortado, lands in your inbox, serving up her hot take on the week's biggest news. It's been a huge week, which can only mean tomorrow's Cortado is going to be a big one too. Don't miss it. Sign up at novara.media/The Cortado. Sami Hamdi is a British-Tunisian journalist, analyst and passionate advocate against the genocide in Gaza, who has been detained in the United States since October the 26th, so almost 2 weeks ago. Hamdi was in the US on a speaking tour, organized by the Council on American Islamic Relations, when he was detained at San Francisco International Airport by the government's Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE, despite traveling on a valid US visa. According to Mariam Udin of the Muslim Legal Fund of America, Hamdi was surrounded by 9 plainclothes agents after clearing security, before being told his visa had been revoked. He's been in detention ever since. Later that day, Department of Homeland Security Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin posted this online. Thanks to the work of Secretary Noem and Secretary Rubio and the men and women of law enforcement, this individual's visa was revoked and he is in ICE custody pending removal. Under President Trump, those who support terrorism and undermine American national security will not be allowed to work or visit this country. It's common sense. Now, that department hasn't so far provided any evidence for the claim that Hamdi undermines United States national security or supports terrorism. But you'll have noticed that McLaughlin quote-tweeted someone called Amy Meck there. Amy Meckelberg, whose identity was only exposed by the Huffington Post in 2018, after she spent years building an anonymous online presence powered by Islamophobia, is the founder of an organization called Resistance Against Islamic Radicals. That was later renamed Rise, Align, Ignite, Reclaim, but its business is pretty clear from recent posts like this one. The mask comes off. Mamdani elected NYC mayor quotes socialists while jihadis gloat as the headline, and it's tagged with communism, Islam, subversive groups. Or this one, the counterfeit Christ, Islam's war to replace Jesus, once again tagged with communism and Islam. Seems pretty cranky to me, and yet Meckelberg has got the attention of a lot of powerful people. One of them is US President Donald Trump's ally, Laura Loomer, who has reposted Meckelberg's post saying this. Who in the admin signed off a visa for an Islamic jihadi? How did Sami Hamdi get a visa to come to the United States? At Secretary Rubio, Tricia Ohio, DHS government, and real Tom Homan. This is outrageous. That's about as stark a portrayal of the intimate connection between right-wing influencers and the Trump administration's officials as you're likely to get, all of which has resulted in the detention without charge of a British citizen in a United States facility. Earlier this week, the United States government tried to transfer Hamdi out of California, where he is currently being held, potentially distancing him from his lawyers. That transfer was blocked by a federal judge, who, according to the Council on American Islamic Relations, also raised questions about the legality of Hamdi's detention. And in a piece published by USA Today on Tuesday, Sami Hamdi's wife Soumaya Hamdi argued that Sami's arrest was an attempt to silence free speech, particularly speech involving criticism of Israel. That's hardly an outrageous suggestion. Back in April, Secretary of State Marco Rubio instructed his department to scrutinize the social media of US visa applicants for criticism of the US or the State of Israel before granting them. And in July, a State Department official testified in court that the State Department regularly took into account speech or actions that it saw as hostile towards Israel when revoking visas. Yesterday, Homeland Security responded to Soumaya's article saying this. The United States has no obligation to host foreigners, like Sami Hamdi, who support terrorism and actively undermine the safety of Americans, and we won't. There is no room in the United States for the rest of the world's terrorist sympathizers, and we are under no obligation to admit them or let them stay. Secretary Noam has made it clear that anyone who thinks that they can come to America and hide behind the First Amendment to advocate for anti-American and anti-Semitic violence and terrorism, think again. Sami Hamdi's lawyer, Hassan Ahmad, had this response to that statement. As Sami Hamdi's lawyer, I remind you that the United States does have an obligation to respect the First Amendment at DHS. You don't get to police speech and hide behind immigration powers. But thanks for galvanizing my client's voice. You try to silence, but just turn up the volume. Earlier today, I was joined by Soumaya Hamdi, wife of Sami Hamdi, and I began by asking her for an update on Sami's condition.
Helena, if you can imagine, you've been detained and deprived of your liberty and your freedom, and you still haven't received any legal explanation as to why that is, because he has not been charged with a crime. I'm sure you can imagine how difficult that is. He's doing his best. Sami doesn't want his family to worry, and so he will try to tell us only the positive things, of which there are very few, to be honest. He's sharing a room with between 80 to 90 people. The conditions are clearly very overcrowded. He was sick over the weekend, and it was difficult for him to obtain any medical assistance. In fact, it was so difficult that he had to call me in desperation. He could barely speak on the phone. He was in a lot of pain, and he just said, Soumaya, I've been asking to see a doctor for hours and no one is coming. I'm in a lot of pain. Can you see if there is a way that you can help me out? So it's incredibly distressing for all of us as a family, and it's really unjust and unfair what is happening to Sami right now.
So where were you when you heard he'd been detained by ICE, and what was your immediate reaction?
Actually, I was getting ready to fly out to New York because it was half term. And, me and the kids have been really looking forward to having a family holiday with Sami. So I was in the dining room, and actually I got a text from a friend who just said, is it true that I've heard that Sami's been abducted by ICE? So immediately, my blood ran cold. What do you mean? This is... I don't know if you can imagine receiving a message like that, and I hope you never do. Unfortunately, when it was confirmed that yes, that actually has happened, we were left completely in the dark. Sami hadn't been allowed to call anyone to let them know. And it was only several hours later, actually around midnight, when he was able to call me for less than a minute, just to say that he was okay, and that he had been taken to a facility in McFarland, which is the Golden State Annex facility. So, just replaying in my mind what must have happened when he was at the airport and he was approached by several ICE officers. I don't know how many in total, somewhere between 4 to 9, any number of them, just for one person, and walking up to him and telling him, your visa's been revoked. You've got to come with us. And then later bundling him into a black van and still not allowing him to call anyone. And actually it happened that I had been trying to call him that morning. So I had called him and someone had hung up the phone. And I thought, okay, maybe he's live on air. He does that if he's live on air. He had an interview with Sky News just a few days before this. And if he's live on air and I'm not aware, he'll hang me up and then call me when he's done. So I thought I must have interrupted an interview or something. And he later told me, no, it was the ICE officer had taken his phone. And I called at that moment and he said, look, this is my wife. Can I just pick up the call and let her know so that someone is aware? And he said no, and he hung me up and switched off the phone.
So the Trump administration has said it's revoked Sami's visa because he supports terrorism and is a threat to national security. What do you make of that?
Absolute garbage. I mean, they're trying to smear Sami's reputation. And, Sami, it doesn't speak to who Sami is as a person at all. Sami is the kind of person who, from a young age, has been chairing discussions, interfaith discussions between members of the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian faiths to try and bring people together. That's who Sami is as a person. Sami is the type of person who stands up in support of Palestinian rights and criticizes the genocide. That's why he's been targeted. And until now, the US government has provided no evidence to support their claims. So publicly, they're saying one thing, but privately, they still have not charged Sami with anything related to the offenses that they are libelously accusing him of. And as I say, it really is an attempt to silence Sami, because he's become a very effective speaker in support of Palestinian rights. He has become very effective at galvanizing support for Palestinian rights. And I'm talking about grassroots support across the board between Muslims, non-Muslims, people of different backgrounds and walks of life. Sami has a way of being able to speak to people's hearts. And that's why he's being targeted. He's been identified as someone who is speaking up too loudly in support of Palestinian rights and too loud in his criticism of the state of Israel. And that's why he's being targeted by far-right social media activists, keyboard warriors, who don't want to see any criticism given to the state of Israel.
Many parallels that you've mentioned there with the abductions of Mahmoud Khalil and of Ramisa Ozturk in the ways in which they're kind of weaponizing on social media. One of the piece of supposed evidence that's been used, at least online, against Sami is a video that was put out by the Middle East Media Research Institute, or MEMRI. That's a group, for people who don't know, who was founded by a former Israeli intelligence officer. In it, Sami does seem to say that October the 7th made him feel quote-unquote euphoric, of course. That's just one video. And Sami said some very different things in other media appearances where he's criticized the celebration of violence. But what role has the MEMRI video played in Sami's detention, and what did you make of the discussion around it?
Yeah, I mean, you've rightly pointed out, Helena, that MEMRI, the people that have produced this video, not only are founded by a former Mossad agent, but they are very well known to be anti-Muslim, racist, Islamophobic, anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian right organization. So that's just off the bat. It's not a credible source. The second thing is that the video that they have produced is actually an edited clip. It's not any kind of original clip. They've chopped, spliced, and then re-added together several different clips of Sami to paint him in the most awful light. And if I may say, actually, I was very disappointed when I saw last week that one of your colleagues mentioned this video, didn't make any reference to the production and the editing of this video against Sami, and kind of, it seemed to me, took at face value what is being, the accusations being made against Sami. And I'd like to say, just for the record, that video will not stand any ground in a court of law. It holds no weight whatsoever. It's a horrible, nasty, libelous accusation that's been as a tool to smear Sami. And as I say, to silence him, because he's become a very effective speaker. And they're using Sami as an example to put fear into other people's hearts who are speaking up in support of Palestinian rights. And like you've rightly pointed out, this is becoming a pattern of behavior with Mahmoud Khalil, Ramisa Ozturk, many others who have been speaking up in support of Palestinian rights. They are now being targeted through immigration routes. ICE has become a tool to silence any kind of criticism that's being leveled against the state of Israel, which I may add is a foreign country. You know, this is the United States that Sami is in, and Sami hasn't been criticizing the United States. It's a foreign government that he has been criticizing, but he's being targeted for that reason.
I'm very glad we've had you on today, especially to be able to make sure that we have as much due diligence in terms of how we discuss things that have become from sources such as MEMRI. So I'm glad you've cleared that up. What kind of help, if any, has Sami had from the British government at all?
It's negligible. You know, I immediately lodged a case for the Foreign Commonwealth Office to inform them of Sami's abduction. And they have tried to get in touch with the US authorities. They have been in touch with the US authorities to find out why Sami's visa was revoked and why he's being detained. Because Sami's more than happy to come home. He's got a country that he wants to come home to. He's got a family that would love nothing more than for him to be home. So there's no real reason to detain him if they don't want him in the United States. Nevertheless, until now, the British government hasn't been given a reason as to why Sami is being detained. The British government has not been given a reason as to why his visa was revoked, nor has the British government been presented with any evidence to support this smear campaign, this kind of smear tactics that have been used to level claims against Sami and tarnish his reputation. So they supplied no evidence at all. And to be honest, I think it speaks to the fact that we are dealing with an administration that doesn't appear to respect due process, doesn't appear to respect the rule of law, and I would say doesn't appear to respect its closest ally and the citizens of its closest ally, because Sami is a British citizen. He is a registered journalist in the UK, and he has every right to his freedom of speech. He has every right to his liberty, and that is currently being infringed upon. And unfortunately, the British government hasn't been able to exert any significant pressure at all on the United States government to remedy this injustice. So I would say to the British government, really, their duty is to bring Sami home as soon as possible, because it sets a very dangerous precedent as to how we should expect British citizens to be treated when they visit the United States. I mean, can you imagine, Helena, you're a journalist. If you are planning a trip to the United States, should you now be worried? Even if you are entering on a valid visa, should you be worried that you could potentially be detained and taken to a detention center because you have leveled criticism against the state of Israel or because you've spoken up in support of Palestinian rights? Is that what we should come to expect now as British citizens?
100%. I was in the United States earlier on this year and I was questioned very thoroughly at the border over my employment. And I was very scared that I would be detained by ICE at that time. And you say, obviously, the British government done very little to help in this case. And you say it's an ally. When you look at something like when people were detained by countries that are seen as our geopolitical enemies, the British government is very happy to make an example of those countries. When it's an ally, it seems that very little help is on the table. And it does seem to me, as you pointed out very correctly there as well, when it comes to citizens of this country, they want to return. Like, as you say, I'm perfectly happy to come back to the United Kingdom if the visa is invalid. But it seems to me they're trying to humiliate and make an example of people who speak out against the genocide in the United States deliberately, rather than, as you say, going through due process. And if a visa is revoked, just returning to the country of origin as soon as possible. But the important thing, I guess, is what happens next from here. What's next for Sami? What's your legal recourse and what's your next steps?
Sami has a hearing it's an immigration hearing on the 10th of November, so this coming Monday, where his case will be put before an immigration judge. As I've said, until now, ICE, the US authorities, have presented no evidence and no other claim to justify his detention, except that his visa has been revoked. His visa was revoked on the 24th of October. He wasn't informed until the 26th of October. So that's all they have on him, which is nothing. Can you imagine being in the United States on a valid visa, your visa being revoked, but you're not told, and then you're held in detention for being an overstayer on a visa that was revoked without your knowledge? The whole thing is dystopian. And it really speaks to the fact that all journalists, all British citizens, and in fact, all US citizens, anyone who values the right to freedom of speech, who values the right to freedom of expression, and who values due process and the rule of law, should be very concerned that we currently have a British journalist being detained without charge by the United States government.
That was Sami Hamdi, wife of British journalist Sami Hamdi, who continues to be detained by the United States authorities. Sami's case is unusual because he is such a high-profile figure that thousands and thousands of ordinary people have now been rounded up by ICE, many in truly terrifying ways, and sometimes in the presence of small children. This video of a raid at a Chicago preschool appeared online yesterday. If you're listening on the podcast, what we saw there was a woman being hauled screaming out of a preschool by two masked men. At one point, she's thrown against the school door, and another she's violently wrenched to a waiting car. According to Illinois Representative Mike Quigley, the woman who was vanished there was a teacher at the preschool, and her detention took place in front of kids and parents. Parents and school administrators have confirmed that the woman was employed at the school. It's far from the first time that ICE has violently detained parents in front of kids, however. In July, an Iranian chiropractor was intercepted by ICE while dropping his child off at preschool.
Go ahead and roll your window all the way down.
Why? What's going on?
Go ahead and roll your window all the way down.
I have a baby in the car.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
Don't have to do anything with the baby. Just roll your window all the way down. Just go ahead and roll your window down. You're in the window. Roll it down. Roll your window all the way down for me, please.
Yeah.
Do you have your ID on you? Police.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, can I see your ID?
Yeah, that's police.
Where are you heading?
Daycare.
I'm sorry?
Daycare. There's a baby in the car.
I understand that.
And is it hard to wait for 3 minutes?
Hey, is your phone down?
Yeah.
She said to put the car.
Yeah, put the car here, but we can, yeah.
Put put the car over there.
Put the car over there? Yeah. Mommy's coming now. Okay, hold on. I'm getting out. I'm getting out.
Well, you should have done it
I
already.
told you 3 times. Unbuckle your seatbelt.
Yeah,
Step out
but
of the
you
car.
still understand.
Step out of the car.
Okay.
You're
Because I'm Iranian.
Yes,
I'm Iranian.
I understand.
That's why they are doing this. I'm a doctor. I'm a doctor. I'm an Iranian.
This is not okay. And no one here will identify themselves to me. They came into you are not okay.
Dalia, under Biden, schools and certain other locations were protected from ICE agents, but under Trump, that rule's been scrapped. Or what does that say about the current administration?
Yeah, I hadn't actually seen those videos before. That is like beyond chilling. It says that the gloves are off. It says that in the US right now, if you're a person of color, regardless of your migration status, regardless of your class, that man was a doctor. You know, he was a doctor. And in the US, if you're a doctor, that is upper middle class. You're a second-class citizen. You're subject to a level of state violence that you wouldn't be subject to if you were white. And that baby in the back of that car is never going to forget the day he saw, or they saw, I don't know the gender of the baby, the day that they saw their father being violently dragged out of a car and disappeared. When we're talking about Trump's mass deportation program and this kind of spectacle of an expansion of immigration violence in the US, of basically people of color being abducted in plain sight, sometimes by plainclothes officers, and disappeared, many of whom get lost in the immigration system. And this is where class does really play a role, because, obviously, if you're more working class, when you get detained by ICE, it becomes very difficult to kind of come out. You don't have access to good legal advice. But regardless of whether or not you have good access to legal advice, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can actually make sense of what is a gratuitously violent system, which is immigration detention and immigration and customs enforcement. It's important to think about this and to see this as a bellwether for what could come to this country if we don't really take the issue of anti-migrant racism very, very seriously. And I'm saying this because I think there has been a little bit of a tendency amongst some progressive circles in recent years to basically try and say that the reason that the far right is popular is because the left have been out of touch on migration. And to imply that somehow we should treat immigration as like a fringe issue or like a distraction. And I don't really know how you can look across the pond and see people being abducted in their workplaces by the state, in their workplaces, in front of their children, when they're in preschools where they're working as a teacher, and be like, oh, that's just a distraction. It's like, to me, I'm just like, that is the heart of state violence. It is the heart of authoritarianism, and it is the heart of class warfare. Because, of course, Reform have promised a Trump-style program of mass deportation. So the vision that they are selling is a very similar one to the one that we're seeing in the US. And it will likely look very similar to what we're seeing in the US, which is people of color with or without regular migration status existing in public life in a very, very precarious way, and having to be subject to or witness highly traumatizing ICE raids in places that should be safe from this kind of violence. So I'm talking like hospitals, preschools, nurseries, daycares, etc. I have friends of mine in the US who say that they don't, people of color, friends of mine in the US who have said that they don't travel anymore without their papers, without their passports. People who are undocumented in the US have just withdrawn from public life altogether. They don't go to the hospital. They don't go to, they don't pick up their kids from school. Some of them have taken their kids out of school because they are so afraid to make any contact with the state. And when that happens, when you create a class of people who avoid all kinds of official civic participation, you are pushing people into a shadow economy and a shadow society where they are very, very unsafe. And I think that what we have to think about is, a lot of people say to me, they say, oh, well, Trump or Farage or whatever, you always say that this country and the US rely on migrant labor. So if they rely on migrant labor, then surely they couldn't possibly close the borders and end migration in the way that they say that they want to end migration. So, surely that means that this isn't going to work. But what we can see from the US is that the ultimate vision is that people will still migrate because that is what people do, but they will migrate in an irregular way, in a way that makes them hyper exploitable, or they will be able to extract migrant labor and exploit migrant labor without those migrants having any kind of pathway to settlement, citizenship, or civil rights. So we see this already in certain sectors, like the agricultural sector, where in this country, without migrant labor, the agricultural sector just simply would not function in this country. 99% of seasonal agricultural workers in this country are migrants. And the way that they resolve this is by basically having these like seasonal visas, where essentially you recruit people, you give them like a 6-month long visa for picking season, you recruit them in, you get them to do the horrifically manual, difficult, essential labor of picking, of seasonal picking. You house them far away from the rest of society. You make sure that they live in these very rural, desolate areas, and then you deport them when their 6-month visa is off. So you get all the benefits of migrant work without the migrant. And the reason that we need to take that very seriously is because that is a very plausible direction that this country is going in. We saw it with the Windrush scandal. We saw people who came to this country, who built this country, and who were entitled to reaping some of the rewards of building that country, of being able to retire in peace, having that right stripped away from them after they had contributed for years and years and years. And so that dynamic of migrant labor without the migrant, of being able to extract someone's labor whilst making sure that they have no civil rights, no participation in public life, no pathway to to citizenship and settlement. That is the overall kind of goal, and that is where the US and the UK are heading. And that is why a lot of these people, Richard Tice, for example, is really obsessed with places like Dubai, and they're really obsessed with places like Singapore, because these are countries that function on the backbone of highly exploited, brutalized migrant labor, and labor of people who have no citizenship rights, who don't have access to the kinds of rights that everyone else enjoys. And that kind of dynamic of a migrant underclass is exactly what I think Reform and Trump want to see in this country, because they don't want to actually get rid of all migrants. They don't want to go and pick the fruit and pick the vegetables and work the night shifts and work all that dangerous work, that difficult work that migrants do. They don't want to be in the care homes trying to deal with very, very difficult conditions, with an aging population, with the demographic crisis. They don't want to deal with that. They don't want their kids to deal with that. They want to be able to recruit that labor on a temporary basis, cut them off from the rest of the society, and then kick them out when they're done with them. And that is what we are seeing unfolding in the US. And that is why, when we're looking at the moment that we're in now, because as I say, one thing in Britain right now is we have the luxury of some time. Migrants' rights has to be at the absolute heart, not only of our fight against authoritarianism, but also our fight for workers' rights. Because what we're talking about here is the creation of a super exploitable class who provide all the labor, who generate all the wealth, and have nothing, get nothing back for it, no rights, don't get remunerated for that, for the wealth that they create. And that is a class issue. That's an economic issue. So I think this is a warning sign to us that we cannot sideline the issue of migration in our fight right now. And I can understand that in this moment, we are in a moment where many people in the country have been given a story about migration that is very, very difficult to reverse with just a few catchy sound bites and just with a bit of comms. But as progressives, we need to understand that what is happening to migrants, both in terms of workers' rights and in terms of civil rights, is the bellwether for what happens to everyone else. And therefore, it has to be at the heart of it.
Very incisive analysis. And I think the real big warning sign as well is was talked there at the start of that question about the fact that there were these protections around certain areas for the Biden administration. Didn't get rid of ICE, though. In fact, they balked at the idea of getting rid of ICE. And it's like, well, what's the worst that could happen if we keep all of the structures in place that were created by the right wing in America? Just we will tame them slightly and then nothing bad will happen further down the line. They had the power to get rid of ICE. They had a trifecta. They could have disbanded and abolished ICE as a force of the United States government when they had the chance. And they didn't. They didn't do it. All of the people who were saying abolish ICE because of what they would become under a fascist Trump administration were correct. And so this is one of the many unforgivable sins of the Biden administration was that those structures that they tried to placate the far right with were never going to be held back at the level that they thought they would when it was handed over to Trump. And the same will be true of the Labour Party. If they compromise on human rights, if they compromise on the ECHR, if they compromise in terms of the demonization of migrants and the structures they put in place to be able to weaponize against migrants in this country, when Reform UK get hold of those same pieces of infrastructure, they will weaponize them to the fullest extent, just as the Trump administration has done. And it should be a warning. And the fact that people aren't understanding just how much of a warning this is, given the scenes we've seen from the United States, is very worrying about our future of democracy. Domestic Direct Action Group Palestine Action was banned as a terrorist group by then Home Secretary Yvette Cooper in July. Since then, it's been a criminal offence under counter-terrorism law to support the group, with the breaches of that law carrying sentences of up to 14 years in prison. And in the intervening months, we've seen thousands of protesters arrested for doing just that, holding up signs of support in a deliberate flouting of the law. But just a week before Parliament voted on the prescription of Palestine Action, The Times, Britain's paper of record, ran a story. The Times claimed that in the context of public anger at the prescription of the group, the Home Office had revealed it was investigating a link between Palestine Action and everyone's favourite boogeyman, Iran. In that piece, The Times says this of Palestine Action. The group invites donations directly through its website, but it does not publish financial information. It is not a charity, so it is not bound by financial transparency rules. The lack of transparency over who is donating to the group has caused concerns in the Home Office about where it is raising the significant sums it requires for its legal costs. Officials are understood to be investigating its source of donations amid concerns that the Iranian regime, via proxies, is funding the group's activities, given that their objectives are aligned. That story was picked up by other outlets as well. The Daily Mail asked, does Palestine Action's cash trail lead all the way to Iran? And The Spectator also ran an article over a suspect link between Palestine Action and Iran. Big, very big if true, except it's probably not true at all. This is from the latest Private Eye. CMS Strategic has acted as Elbit's UK PR firm for some years. A witness known by I heard Georgia Pickering, CMS's managing director and owner, claiming credit for getting a story into newspapers about Palestine Action, the direct action group that damaged Elbit factories and other premises the group says are linked to the war in Gaza. Now, if you don't know, Elbit Systems is Israel's largest military manufacturer, with several sites in the United Kingdom. Since its formation in the 2020, Palestine Action not only frequently damaged Elbit factories and premises, they appear to have successfully shut at least one of them down. Back in September, Elbit shuttered a large site in Bristol that had been subject to dozens of Palestine Action protests, cutting their lease short by 4 years. And Elbit was so frustrated by Palestine Action's actions at their sites that they then lobbied the government to order retrials for activists who'd been acquitted in British courts, according to documents seen by Declassified. So Elbit had every reason to try and lubricate Yvette Cooper's case for proscribing the group, including planting a likely false story about a connection to Iran. It's worth noting that the story came in the Times at the day out after the US bombed Iranian nuclear sites this summer. Pretty fishy stuff, but it gets even fishier. When the Times article first came out, Private Eye had questions over its sourcing. Their column goes on to say this. The story, which first appeared in the Times in June, claimed that the Home Office was investigating Palestine Action over possible Iranian funding. However, when the Eye approached the Home Office at the time, it said it did not recognise that claim. So the Home Office was as mystified as we are by where the Times sourced its story. Now, CMS categorically denies planting the Iranian funding story, but it's worth pointing out that back in 2024, Palestine Action doused CMS's own offices in red paint in response to the sterling work they've done for Israel's #1 killing company. Dalia, this is quite a claim that's been made by Private Eye. What do you make of it?
Look, whatever you think of Palestine Action, you cannot deny the fact that if you live in a country where a massive corporation can successfully plant very flimsy stories in the press about a protest group and contribute to an environment in which that protest group then becomes criminalized by the state, then you do not live in a country where you have a truly free press, and you do not live in a country where you have true civil liberties. What you have is a press and a political culture that is steeped in clientelism, that sees its main remit as being protecting the interests of the highest bidder, which in this case was Elbit Systems. And, you know, that's before you get to the added layer of the fact that this is all happening within the context of a genocide where, and the fact that this company is supplying weapons to a country that has been deemed by the international court, by international courts, to be at plausible risk of committing genocide. You know, we're not even getting to the question of why the hell does a weapons company that is working at the behest of a state like that, why is it operating in Britain? Instead, when you have a press that is willing to sell itself to the highest bidder, you have the lines of accountability go in reverse. The lines of accountability, you know, the questions that should be being asked is, why is this company that is supplying weapons to a state that is at very plausible risk of committing genocide, why are they able to function? Instead, you're like, why is this protest group that is responding to that, whatever you think of their tactics, instead the line of accountability is going down rather than up. And, you know, the government are going to hide behind, and the Times as well for that matter, are going to hide behind the idea that Palestine Action is, you know, this fringe group that uses, you know, non-traditional protest methods. Like, by non-traditional, I guess, let me say non-mainstream activism methods. And they're going to kind of try to hide behind that sort of sidelining or exceptionalizing of Palestine Action. We had to take this action with Palestine Action because it is an exceptional kind of protest group. But even if you agree with that assessment, Palestine Action is not the only organization or protest group that is being subject to this kind of suppression, particularly around the issue of Palestine. You know, a few days ago, the government, in response and in the context of this kind of hysteria that is being whipped up by the press in collaboration with the companies who have a vested interest in continuing this genocide, you know, this government introduced an amendment a few days ago, I believe, an amendment to the Crime and Policing Bill, which would restrict repeat protest. Now, that is a clear response to the fact that over the past 2 years, almost every other week, hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets in an A to B march, you know, the most mainstream. So it's such a mainstream form of protest that you ask the police permission to do it first. But because that has happened repeatedly, and it has been a thorn in the side of the way in which the British state wants to narrativize how British people feel about Israel. You know, the Keir Starmer wants you to believe that everyone in Britain, you know, is pro-Israel and stands with Israel. But you switch on your television and you look at the hundreds of thousands of people pouring through the streets, and you say, actually, the British people have a much more critical understanding of the situation. But they have no actual means to stop that from happening. So they just introduce an arbitrary amendment that says, well, you can have the right to protest, but we're going to limit the number of times you can protest something. So what we're seeing is that it's not this overall crackdown on civil liberties and this rise of authoritarianism, of an authoritarianist streak within the British state, which always existed but is being particularly heightened right now. It's not just about, or not just impacting these kind of more fringe parts of the movement or these more non-mainstream parts of the movement, but it is impacting even the most mainstream conventional form of protest. And what that goes to show you is two things. Firstly, it shows you that this is nothing to do with choice of tactics or norms around civil disobedience. And it's everything to do with the fact that this rise of civil disobedience is happening in response to the British state's complicity with Israel, and that the point is to crack down on dissent against Israel. And the second thing it shows you is that, you know, we talk a lot on Novara about the risks of an authoritarian reform government. But what we have to see, much like the fact that the Biden administration kept ICE intact and funded ICE, laying the groundwork for Trump to then use ICE as a weapon to terrorize people of color, particularly working class people of color all across the US. In a similar vein, we are seeing the Labour Party laying down the groundwork and the architecture for authoritarianism in this country. And so it's not just a spectre on the horizon, this idea of our civil liberties as we have known them being disappeared. This is actually something that the groundwork is being laid for under a Labour government, under a former human rights lawyer, nonetheless.
An addendum to this story as well, worth pointing out here that the head of the CMS Strategic, Georgia Pickering, is also a current Labour Party representative on Bracknell Forest Council. Also among their staff is another Labour councillor, Kira Lewis, who sits on Waltham Council. And this is how the CMS Strategic website describes her career thus far. Kira joined CMS Strategic in early 2025 with a background in UK politics, geopolitics, and media communications. Kira joined from BICOM, having previously worked for the Labour Party, and before that, Labour First, removing the hard left's influence from mainstream politics. Kira is a councillor in the London Borough of Waltham Forest, holds a BA in War Study from King's College London, and is studying a MA in Politics and Contemporary History, researching the shared status of Jerusalem. Outside of work, Kira enjoys cooking, Soul Cycle, and is a fan of West Ham. I mean, make of that what you will, but not only has she worked for BICOM, that is, the Britain-Israel Communications and Research Centre, and the Labour Party, she's also a West Ham supporter. Hark the Herald Angels sing, they're advertising wondrous things. It seems Christmas season comes earlier and earlier every year, and with the season comes the deluge of mawkish adverts meant to tug at the heartstrings so that Brits part with their cash. The trend was started by John Lewis in 2007 and has since been copied by many other outlets such as M&S and Sainsbury's, and its progenitors are back with their 2025 offering, and it's as you'd expect. Let's take a quick look.
How did I grab enough glasses? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Take my hand, come away, come out of the blues. Boy, everything
pretty standard fare there. An advert involving a heartwarming moment where a family bonds over gift giving. Hardly a radical departure from what we usually expect from a John Lewis commercial. That is, however, until the right-wing rogues gallery of opinion havers online made it part of their culture war du jour. I bet you at home are wondering how on earth they might have weaponized something so innocuous. Well, when there's a will, there's a way, and the engagement bait will not post itself. Here's Reform UK member and husband of Swallow Braverman, Rael Braverman's take. Just watched the new John Lewis advert and it brought tears to my eyes. No wokery, no DEI messaging, no unusual family setups. Just a father, a son, and the simple, timeless love of family. A beautiful portrait of ordinary British life. Well done, John Lewis. And here's a slot posting account whose take got over 30,000 likes on Twitter with very similar sentiments. The 2025 John Lewis Christmas advert promotes family values, features a normal white British family, and shows a dad giving up the party life for his baby boy. The left will be in meltdown, but this is the best Christmas ad in years. Woke is dead. We are so back. So, I have some questions. Firstly, I thought men showing their emotions was woke. You've really been owning the left here by supporting positive representations of masculinity. And is their only definition of wokery and DEI just the existence of non-white people? The bit that really exposes their true opinions here is Braverman's invocation of the idea of unusual family setups. By that, presumably he's referring to non-straight relationships. It turns out it really is easy to trigger right-wing snowflakes just by existing as a minority, apparently. And to cap off the delusional takes, here's a clip from Reform UK councillor Darren Grimes' YouTube project called Reasoned, which is breathtaking in its lack of self-awareness.
So the first thing that you notice is that they haven't decided to fill it with people who have to tick a box, and you haven't got a trans person, a black person, someone from every different ethnicity to fill a box. It's just a normal British family. Doesn't matter the colour of their skin.
So, hang on a minute. If it doesn't matter the colour of their skin, why was it the first thing that you noticed? Spoiler alert, most normal people aren't scrutinising the ethnicity of people in the adverts they're watching. Getting real Sarah Poachin vibes from this one. Also very funny for them to imply this is somehow a representation of the 2025 defeat of wokeism, when both the 2022 and 2024 John Lewis adverts also featured white families as well. The reality, of course, is that whilst right-wingers are desperate to find woke boogeymen atop the marketing boards at companies that represent any amount of diversity in their advertising material, marketing boards are not ideologically motivated. They're motivated by one single metric, which is what generates the most revenue for shareholders, and they pay good money for it too. What John Lewis and all their compatriots are engaging in is what is called earned media, when brand recognition is increased through third-party engagement. In an era where very few of us watch TV, at least not live when catch-up is easily available, it's much harder than it ever has been to cut through to the public with an ad blocker in the way. The way companies have sidestepped this in recent years is to rely on social media virality to increase brand awareness, either by having long-running trends like the Christmas adverts that everyone rushes to comment their 2 cents on, or via outrage marketing, like Nike's Colin Kaepernick advert that led to very strange people burning their trainers on the internet. All publicity is good publicity, and it doesn't matter whether your opinions on John Lewis or Nike or Bud Light or whatever is positive or negative. The fact you're talking about it makes it a trending topic and puts the brand name in people's heads. Because at the end of the day, this is a commercial. They want you to buy their kitchenware. And us on the left, we have never been naive enough to take any corporation at their word. For example, whenever the right complain about forced diversity, when they see LGBTQ+ representation from corporations, they believe that those corporations are being totally sincere. Yet the left dislike this because we know they're not. We call it rainbow capitalism for a reason. Dalia, have you had any strong opinions about an advert recently?
No, because I have real problems. Like when it's like that thing of like, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's like when all you have is a Twitter account, everything looks like an opportunity for an insane hot take that you're going to like submit us all to. It exactly puts us into this like situation that you outline, Helena, which is like on the left, like we have been making so much effort to kind of talk about how like representation is not enough, and like to fight against this kind of liberal idea that the anti-racism can be boiled down to how many brown faces or black faces there are around a boardroom or in elite spaces. And, we want to talk about how the working class globally who do the most dangerous, exploited work are disproportionately people of color, and how race is a system of valuing human life. And, the most, and it's a way of, and that intersects with the creation of economic value. And then you end up having to be in this conversation where it's like, so even now we have to be in a situation where we're having to talk about why it's okay to have Black people on TV. And it's like, I don't want to waste my time having to talk about this. I want to talk about how do we organize transnationally, and how do we make sure that the people who generate most of the wealth in this world have a dignified life. And yet now we're having to talk about how many, Black and brown faces or queer families are represented on telly. It's the right that constantly draws us into these conversations. But at the end of the day, we kind of do have to discuss them, because it is really scary to think that there are political influencers who are gaining more and more influence, and who are getting closer and closer to state power, who literally see the presence of people of color and queer people in public life as something to be eliminated. It kind of goes back. I mean, obviously it's a much lower stakes iteration or manifestation of this problem, but it does go back to what I was saying earlier about how there's this overall drive to say, well, if we live in a world and we live under an economy in which migrant labor is essential for the most developed countries to be able to maintain themselves and reproduce themselves, then the way that we're going to compromise with that is we're going to have migrants and all of the value that they produce, and their children of migrants and all of the value that they produce, whilst eliminating them from public life and giving them no civil rights. It's like, if that is a spectrum, ICE raids are on one end, and this desire to eliminate the humanity of Black and brown people and queer people in the public's eye is kind of the other end of it. But it's sort of like a long continuum where the kind of these cultural processes intersect with and lay the groundwork and are co-produce the more extreme forms of state, material, and economic violence. And of course, I mean, it goes without saying that in this country, 31% of children in this country are in poverty. 350,000 people in this country are homeless. The waiting list to see an NHS consultant in England is at a record high. And all the right have to offer us, other than making a lot of those problems worse through privatization of housing, healthcare, and also through welfare cuts, alongside making that worse, all they have to offer us is, the game of count the number of white people are in the John Lewis advert. It should be an open goal for us, really, because that is such an insulting offer. If you can't pay your bills, what do you care that the family in the John Lewis advert are all white? I mean, you couldn't, if you had showed me that advert and you had said this advert was going to become the basis of a culture war talking point, I don't even think, with all of my experience of being in the eyes of the culture war and analyzing it in public life and all of this, I don't even think that you could have left me there for days and I wouldn't have predicted how it would have actually been made into the terrain of a culture war. It's absurd. It's a symptom of deep, of deep alienation and deep boredom on the part of whoever is engaging in this kind of these banal conversations at a moment when we have so many serious things to be thinking about right now.
I just want to say something. Ryle Braverman, I've been pointed out, quit Reform UK a couple of months back. He was a member for about 6 months. I want to clear that up. I just think that just people who are putting so much stock in the fabric of society, in what they're seeing in adverts, I'm like how much does your commodity fetishism have to be so that you're generating your personal idea of cultural worth out of what corporations are trying to sell to you? Like when there was a big hoo-ha in the United States when Cracker Barrel changed their logo, I'm like, yeah, they're trying to sell you things. They're trying to make you part with your cash. You're the advert. If you're out here getting mad online about an advert or talking about an advert because it's sufficiently white enough for you, all you're doing is helping this company sell products and move merchandise. And they really do take cultural value from this. They really will say things like, well, I'm far more likely to shop at John Lewis now that they've done what I've seen in this advert. And despite the fact that I do not think that there was anybody involved in the entire creation of this process for this advert who went, let's make sure we have a white family in the advert so that all the racists are happy, so that all of the right-wingers are happy. That's just not happened. And they are so bought into it that they've just imagined that the left are all just desperate for like representation politics and aren't just looking at diversity in adverts going, oh, that's nice, isn't it? I'm glad we've got that, rather than being mad that it's not there. When, as you rightly pointed out, there are real material problems, first of all, facing everybody, but also facing people from minority backgrounds as well. And there's those material problems that really matter. Representation is one thing, and it's better to have it than not. But at the end of the day, that will come from the people themselves. It will come from state policy. It won't come at the behest of corporations and large companies. Thank you very much, Dalia, for joining me tonight.
Thank you. All of this conversation just reminded me of, I don't know, this is actually like a canon event in my life. I think it was like a few years ago in 2022 or something, when there was a huge backlash against the desexualization of the green M&M. Am I the only person that this was like a foundational moment for me in terms of it being seared into my brain, where like the green M&M character used to have like sexy little heels and like little like pouty lips. And then they rebranded her and she was like a little bit less sexy. And people, and I think Tucker Carlson was like outraged by it. And I was just a bit like, why did you think that the green M&M was sexy before? Let's have a conversation about that.
Exactly.
It's like when
it's like when the gamers got mad when they stopped making the video game characters sexy. I'm like, well, I'm not looking for sex appeal. I'm looking for an actual playable video game here with very incredibly strange priorities.
Take a real woman on a nice date and be nice to her. Stop trying to get your jollies from the green M&M, who never asked for that. She never asked to be sexualized.
Very, very true. Just want to say thank you very much for the super chat here. We've got one from Oticon United States for $4.99. Thank you very much for that. Who says, our state is built for migrant capital to exploit migrant labor, which is very, very true. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.